the side of the Lake Munson canoe. And you can see the Lake Munson canoe. It's open. It's on display in the Gray Building in downtown Tallahassee, right above the Florida Museum of History. And you can see what look to be peaks and troughs in the iron data. Now, we suspect that this may be an indication that there was some sort of painted decoration, maybe lunettes, something like this, that was on the sides of these canoes. Now, iron is a really nice element for us to measure with PXRF. And it's probably red or black, normally, is what we would anticipate when you get this kind of geochemical signature. But we're not at a point where we can say for sure what colors were there and what colors were absent. We're also not at a point where we can kind of say with complete confidence if there were multiple colors or what colors were certainly missing. So as I said earlier, with the blue on the Irma canoe, we could detect traces of the blue paint when we measured it, on the paint itself. But its absence doesn't necessarily mean that the whole canoe wasn't painted blue. It just means that our machine can't detect evidence of it. So we don't necessarily understand how all the preservation of these potential pigments works out, especially elementally across the range of different pigments that could have been used in prehistory. But what it does seem to point to so far, preliminary data with all the necessary caveats, is that these canoes were decorated, and it's just a matter of looking very carefully at the geochemical data and trying to sort it out. And so this kind of brings me back to my final point, and this is what I'd like to end on, and maybe if anyone has any suggestions or questions or anything, we can open it up afterwards. But we're talking about the canoe as a really important piece of material culture 2,000 years ago in Florida. It was not only the way you transported your family across the state of Florida, but it was also essential for forming bonds, for forming friendships, for building family ties, all of these other things. And so people would spend hundreds of hours working on these canoes, and then even more time in the canoes, traversing the different waterways in Florida. And these canoes were very important to everyone, whether you were making it, using it, or just observing it coming up and down the river. And it seems reasonable to expect that when you spend so much time and energy with or around or on a canoe, that you might also decorate it in some way. And so what we like to think is that these decorations were a way of people kind of expressing their identities, how they thought about their groups, and what these canoes maybe meant to them, and in their very short lifetimes within the larger longue durée of archaeological time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions because I just find this topic absolutely fascinating. First question that I have is, how many Native American groups do we have here in Florida?
Federally recognized? Oh, well, yeah, it's a bit tricky. So there's the Seminole and the Miccosukee are the federally recognized tribes.
Pardon? Okay. So within these, tribes and different groups, was there anything very different about the methodology of construction? And also, one question that I would really like you to answer is, was there any specific type of tree? What kind of woods were actually used in the construction of the material?
Those are great questions. So as far as connecting canoe styles to historically known tribes, especially when we get into the historic period, we have what seems to be a pretty clear Seminole style dugout canoe, but then there's a wide range of other different types of canoes, and really trying to pigeonhole the historic evidence into this is a Miccosukee type and this is a X, Y, and Z type. It doesn't necessarily fit. So this hasn't really been resolved yet. When we step back into the prehistoric period, of course, we have we have a larger data set. So we're really only working with maybe 50 or so historic canoes across the state of Florida that we know of. Dugout canoes, I should say. The prehistoric period, we have a much larger data set. And so we can kind of form nicer types because we have, a bigger set, and we can say, these 20 all look alike and these 30 all look alike. And then there does seem to be a little bit of chronological variation. So there's these, sometimes there are little compartments made in the middle of the canoe, and that seems to be middle to late archaic. But again, we struggle with with historical sampling bias, because the majority of a quarter of our samples are from Noonan's Lake. So, you know, we have 100 of 400 dugout canoes are all from basically the north shore of one lake. So I would not want to connect, you can hold my feet to the fire on this one, but I would not want to connect a boat type with a tribe, with the exception of the Seminole example. And then your second question, if you remind me real quick, I'm sorry, I kind of went off on that.
I'm not even remembering the second question at this point, but.
Oh, type of wood, of course.
Okay, so you're saying about 2,000 years ago, we're talking about paint. So was the paint, say, derived from, say, substances like berries, or, you know, even, you know, animal, you know, byproducts,
Sure.
or things like that? Could you speak to a little bit about the composition of the paint?
Yeah, of course. So ochre, red clays and things like this, you have highly ferric small rocks and things like that, especially in the north. And these lend themselves quite nicely to a kind of red paint or decoration. You could also make paints from, or pigments rather. It's probably better to use the term pigment than paint. I think paint maybe is, in the historic context, denotes one thing, but pigment is more accurate. And I've been using a little loose today, and I apologize for that. You could use kind of charcoal and things like this to create a black color. Crushed shell and limestone can create a white. The geochemical signature that's often related to yellow paint is bromine. I haven't figured out exactly what might be used to create that. Sulfur is also a possibility to create yellow. So we have a few possibilities, and we do have a fair bit of red rocks and things like that that are oftentimes found in archaeological sites, and thought that when they're ground up, they're used as pigments to decorate wood or mud walls and things like this. So, and then back to your question about the wood, which was your second question that I forgot about. Pine is one of the more common woods. So that's at least at Noonan's Lake, that's the most frequently used wood. But we could also ask Julie Duggins here, who's really researched the type of wood more than I have.
Pine, over 90% pine.
Yeah.
Some cypress, yes. So it's been said that cypress was more common in the historic period, but it just doesn't exactly play out with all the records. And that could have been true, but maybe we just don't have the thin section.
Well, the reason I said that is because you don't have these huge pines in South Florida
Yeah,
that
very
we
different
have
environment.
here, so
Very different environment.
there's gotta be some environmental, you know, points in that.
Use the tree that's there.
Yeah, look,
I wonder about deforestation. Some of us now have native cattle operations, and I wonder which effect that has had, because you don't have those trees available.
Yeah, also the turpentine industry in the early 20th century would also be a big factor in kind of denuding the landscape. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a great thing to think about. What it would be like when you no longer have. I mean, you need a big tree, right? I mean, you need. It's not only got to be tall, but it has to be, you know, yay wide or so to be able to at least. Most of these were probably kind of pulled, so you stand up most of the time. But you still need something that's relatively wide to make it stable that you can stand it. So yeah, the quality of the trees is incredibly important. So I don't know what that would be like, but we look around Tallahassee in Florida, it just has so many trees. So yeah, it's an interesting point though.
Well, the reason I ask is I work in Mexico and Belize, and with pollen diagrams for the prehistoric period, we have a lot of evidence for deforestation, which of course has continued. Now there is, where we were working, a huge sugarcane industry, which I guess also has in South Florida. And they can't get trees. I saw a dugout canoe that was about as big as this glove seat, kind of work.
Yeah.
You know, so just given your whole premise of the importance of these things, it's all tied up in a lot of different factors of what happens. If you have a lot of deforestation and yeah, trees.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, it sounds like they're just using trees that fell down. They didn't cut trees to do it, or did they?
Well, it's hard. We don't know for sure. The selection of the tree was probably a really important process. So if you're going to invest hundreds of hours a month of your group's time in making one of these canoes, it seems reasonable to infer. Again, we have no evidence for this. It's just me kind of making stuff up as I go. But it seems reasonable to think that how one selects the tree would have been a very careful and thoughtful process, and potentially also ritualized. So you kind of believe in good luck, bad luck, tough break type of stuff, and so you kind of, I suspect that there was probably there might have been a specialist that goes around and says, yes, you guys, you want to use this tree, or at least, you know, the patriarch of the group or the matriarch of the group would profess to have a certain degree of knowledge, whether that knowledge is ritual based or science based or combination of the two, which is probably the case. They would say, you know, this is the better tree. We want to use this one, and maybe that tree had already fallen in a storm, and that had a certain level of importance with it, or maybe not. I always think of the natural when he makes his bat. That it was the tree that was struck by lightning, and then, you know, he shaves the bat and everything, and this is his lucky bat. And so maybe it was something akin to the process that in the movie The Natural. But, yeah. Yep.
You were showing the diagrams of the drainage basins in Florida and discussing what ocean they went to. And, you know, certainly there was coastal navigation with these canoes as well as rivers and lakes. And looking at the signature that you're obtaining in front of these canoes, is there could there possibly be a signature of a characteristic of a canoe that spent a lot of time in salt water as opposed to fresh water?
Yeah, that'd be great to sort that out. Our premise is that all things being equal, the canoe found in a relatively uniform deposit impacted equally from bow to stern by post-depositional processes. One would anticipate that the geochemical signature across the whole hull would be uniform. And so what we're really looking for is